Okay, here's something interesting. More Americans are actually bowling these days than, say, a few decades ago.
Hmm.
But, and this is the kicker, bowling leagues, those regular weekly social things, they've pretty much tanked.
Yeah, that's a really striking contrast, isn't it?
Hmm.
It says a lot, or at least it suggests a lot about how we're connecting, or maybe not connecting.
Exactly. It feels like a clue to something bigger. And that's what we're digging into today using Robert Putnam's, well, landmark book, Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of American Community.
Right, a huge piece of work based on just a staggering amount of data, wasn't it? Like almost 500,000 interviews over 25 years.
That's the one. It's a deep look at these shifts. And, for anyone interested in exploring these kinds of big societal ideas further, there's a great resource called Mindful Moments over on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they do these AI-driven book analyses, really insightful stuff designed to get you thinking critically about exactly these sorts of topics. So Putnam uses this bowling alone image. It's more than just bowling, obviously.
It's a metaphor, yeah. For this larger trend, he saw people doing things by themselves that they used to do together in groups.
Right. And this connects directly to his core idea, which is social capital. Can you maybe unpack that a bit? What is social capital, according to Putnam?
Sure. So Putnam defines social capital as basically the connections between individuals. It's the social networks people have, but also, crucially, the norms of reciprocity and trustworthiness that kind of grow out of those networks.
Okay, reciprocity and trustworthiness. So like I scratch your back, you scratch mine, and we generally trust people will follow through.
Exactly that. It's that shared understanding, that sense that people in your network, in your community are generally reliable and will, help each other out. It's what makes those networks actually work.
Got it. And he makes a distinction, doesn't he, between different types of social capital?
He does, yeah. Two main types. Bonding and bridging.
Bonding and bridging, okay.
So bonding social capital is, think of it like social superglue. It connects people who are already quite similar, maybe in an ethnic group, a close-knit neighborhood club, that sort of thing. It's very inward-looking.
Good for reinforcing group identity, like helping people within that group get by.
Precisely. It provides crucial support within the group. Bridging social capital, though, is different. It reaches outward. It connects people across different social divides, different races, classes, religions, political views.
So more like a bridge, literally, connecting different groups.
Right. Think of, say, the civil rights movement, which brought together people from very diverse backgrounds. That's bridging capital in action. And Putnam argues this type is really key for getting ahead in a diverse society, for broader progress.
Okay, so bonding helps you cope within your circle, bridging helps connect different circles for wider benefit, and Putnam's big finding was that both are declining.
Yes. His data pointed towards a significant decline across the board, really, in the latter half of the 20th century.
Where did he see the sharpest drops?
Well, it was pretty widespread. Take political participation, voter turnout went down, fewer people were attending town meetings or, working for political parties.
Okay, politics. What else?
Civic participation took a big hit, too. Membership in organizations like the PTA, the League of Women Voters, even the Red Cross.
Mm-hmm.
He found membership fell by like 25 to 50% in many cases.
Wow, that's substantial.
It really is. And religious participation, too. Fewer people attending services regularly, less involvement in church or synagogue activities.
So formal organizations are seeing less engagement. What about just, hanging out? Our day-to-day connections.
That's also part of the picture. He points to fewer connections made at work, think declining union membership, but also just less socializing with colleagues outside of work tasks. And informally, people reported visiting friends less, having people over for dinner less often, even having fewer family dinners together.
It sounds like a general pulling back, a sort of social introversion.
You could put it that way. And maybe the most worrying indicator is trust. The percentage of Americans saying they felt most people can be trusted, that jumped dramatically, from over half, maybe 55% in 1960, down to only about 35% by the late 90s.
That trust deficit, that seems huge, like it would make everything harder.
It does. Putnam calls it a kind of tax on social life. When trust is low, everything requires more effort, more contracts, more safeguards. Collective action becomes much more difficult.
So what did he think was causing all this, driving this decline?
He looked at several potential culprits. First, the pressures of time and money, people working longer hours, maybe multiple jobs, dual income families feeling stretched. But he estimated this only accounted for maybe 10% of the decline.
Only 10%? I might have guessed higher.
Yeah, interestingly, he found that often the busiest people were actually more civically engaged, not less. Then there's suburbanization and sprawl people living further apart, commuting longer, potentially disconnected from walkable town centers or community institutions. That also clocked in around 10%.
Okay, sprawl, 10%. What's next?
Technology and mass media, specifically television. His argument was that TV watching really privatized leisure time. Instead of going out to a lodge meeting or playing cards with neighbors, people were staying home watching the box. He put this at about 25%.
A quarter of the decline down to TV, that's significant.
It is. But the biggest factor, according to his analysis, was generational change. About 50%, so half of the decline.
Half. Wow. How does that work?
Essentially, the generation that came of age during the Depression and World War II, sometimes called the Greatest Generation or the Civic Generation, was exceptionally engaged in community life. They built and joined organizations at very high rates.
Right.
And subsequent generations, baby boomers, Gen X, while involved in different ways perhaps, just didn't show the same levels of participation in those traditional forms of civic and social life. So as the older, highly engaged generation passed away, they weren't replaced by equally engaged younger cohorts, leading to an overall drop.
So it's less about people changing their habits individually and more about generational replacement patterns.
That's the main driver, according to Putnam's math, yes. Though all the factors play a role, of course.
Okay, so we have these declines driven by various factors, especially generational shifts. What are the actual, real-world consequences? Why should we care if we're bowling alone?
Well, the impacts Putnam identified are pretty serious and touch on a lot of areas. For instance, education. Communities with lower social capital tend to have worse outcomes in schools, even when you control for things like poverty.
Lower social connections, lower school performance. What else?
Higher crime rates and people feeling less safe in their neighborhoods. Makes sense, right? Fewer eyes on the street, less informal social control.
Yeah, that tracks.
Economically, too. Regions with stronger social networks tend to have better economic performance. Those networks help people find jobs, start businesses, facilitate cooperation. Less social capital can mean diminished economic prosperity.
Okay, education, crime, economy.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Health, surprisingly. Or maybe not so surprisingly when you think about social support. Lower social capital is correlated with poorer health outcomes and even shorter lifespans.
Wow. Loneliness can literally be bad for your health.
It seems so. And finally, it impacts democracy itself. Less participation, less trust, makes democratic institutions less effective and responsive.
It really paints a picture of social connection being fundamental, like infrastructure for a healthy society.
That's a good way to put it. He does acknowledge, briefly, a potential dark side, like how tight bonding capital can sometimes lead to exclusion of outsiders. But overall, his argument is strongly that the benefits of social capital far outweigh the negatives.
Okay, it sounds a bit bleak, all this decline. But you mentioned revival earlier. Putnam offered some hope, right?
Absolutely. He didn't just diagnose the problem. He looked for solutions and signs of hope. He points to a historical parallel, the Progressive Era, roughly 1890s to 1920s.
Back after the Gilded Age.
Exactly. The Gilded Age saw massive industrialization, inequality, and much like the late 20th century, a significant decline in social connection and trust. But then came the Progressive Era reformers.
Right. People started building new institutions.
Yes, a whole wave of new organizations sprung up. Settlement houses, PTAs actually started then, Rotary clubs, NAACP, League of Women Voters, all kinds of civic innovation aimed at rebuilding community and connection. And it worked. They managed to reverse the decline and build a much more civically engaged society for the first half of the 20th century.
So history shows it can be done. Decline isn't inevitable or irreversible.
That's his key message of hope. And, thinking about understanding these complex shifts and finding ways forward, resources like the Mindful Moments channel we mentioned and discussions like the ones we try to have here, they offer ways to process these big ideas and maybe find inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. Tools for reflection. So, drawing on that Progressive Era example, what kind of things did Putnam suggest could help rebuild social capital today?
He offered a range of possibilities, not like a single magic bullet, but areas to focus on. Things like strengthening civic education in schools, getting young people involved early.
Makes sense.
Workplace reforms, encouraging employers to be more family-friendly, maybe facilitating employee involvement in the community, thinking about urban planning, designing communities that encourage interaction, less sprawl, more public spaces.
So physical design matters.
Definitely. Also, being more mindful about technology and media, use balancing screen time with face-to-face engagement, actively participating in organizations, even small local ones, and finding ways to foster connections across generations, bridging that gap we talked about earlier.
It sounds like a lot of it comes down to conscious choices, both individually and collectively.
I think that's right. Recognizing the value of these connections and then actively choosing to invest time and energy in building and maintaining them.
So the big takeaway seems to be, yes, the way we connect has definitely changed and maybe declined in some traditional ways. But history shows us that communities can consciously rebuild social fabric. It's possible.
Precisely. It's not a lost cause. Change is possible. Revival is possible.
Which really brings the question back to you listening right now.
Thank you.
Thinking about all this, the bonding, the bridging, the forces pulling us apart, and the ways we might come together, how can you actively cultivate both those strong, close-knit ties and those broader, diverse connections in your own life, in your own community, especially in today's world?
That's the real challenge, isn't it? Worth mulling over.
Definitely something to think about. If this conversation sparks some thoughts for you, please do subscribe so you don't miss future explorations.
Yeah, and share it with friends or colleagues who might find it interesting too.
Absolutely. We'll also put a link in the description if you want to grab a copy of Bowling Alone and dive even deeper into Putnam's research.
It's a rewarding read. Dense, but important.
For sure. But most importantly, we hope this encourages you to keep thinking critically about the connections in your life and the forces shaping our society. Thanks for tuning in.